Next month, this time, we'll be saying Merry Christmas. Today is the 25th day in the month of November. And it is one day after the Jamaica Labour Party staged their 81st annual conference at the National Arena, which was converted into a sea of green. I had reason to rush out to Old Harbour yesterday. And let me tell you something. When I was on the side going towards Old Harbour on the highway, I mean, it's almost like every vehicle that I was seeing on the other side had some green protruding heading towards Kingston and no doubt to the arena. It was seemingly full inside and thousands were gathered outside. The question is was it a success? And this morning, Marlon Morgan of the Jamaica Labour Party's Communications Task Force is my guest at this time to look back at the conference and to discuss some other matters relating to his party. Good morning, Marlon. How are you doing today?
Hi, good morning, Richie. And let me say good morning to your listeners. And let me take the opportunity to thank, first and foremost, the cross-section of Jamaicans who came out to the arena yesterday, particularly known JLP supporters, to endorse the government, the party that forms government, and in so doing assisted us in staging what I certainly describe, Richie, as the mother of all conferences.
It was that big?
Big subtle. Big subtle.
So when you say river come down this time, it is not an exaggeration, is it?
Absolutely. I mean, political parties, make no mistake, seek to essentially organize conferences. They seek to mobilize their support because the optics in the production, Richie, counts as much as the actual messaging. And if you had any occasion to take in what transpired at conference yesterday, you will see that considerable attention was focused in a concerted way by the Jamaica Labour Party and conference organizers like myself on ensuring that the optics, just the sheer look and feel of the conference, was on point. We ensured that the mobilization was on point. Labor rights were energized. There are those folks who would have felt that because the PNP retained two PNP strongholds in Town and Morant Bay, that somehow labor rights would be dejected or deflated on the eve of conference. Couldn't they be more incorrect? They couldn't be more incorrect on that one. And then the messaging. We ensured that all our speakers were fit for purpose. They all had important messages to convey, and they all delivered, with the chief messenger being the Prime Minister and Jamaica Labour Party leader, Dr. the Most Honorable Andrew Michael Holness.
So you didn't see it as any biggie, the fact that you didn't win those two seats that you mentioned, and that you would have had to give a certain kind of showing at the conference as a result of those two losses. It didn't factor in the equation? Yes?
I'm not diminishing the outturn of the elections in any way. Mm-hmm. So the truth is, political parties exist to contest and, I dare say, win contested elections. Now, we came up short in respect of Town and, of course, Morant Bay. But we moved the margin in Morant Bay from 400 to just about 100. And we essentially competed well in Town with a candidate that was relatively new to the space in terms of her, profile as a political leader. Our former councillor, the person who is now deceased and made way or created the by-election, triggered the by-election, she's someone who was such a formidable force that when she won in February, she essentially turned around basically a PNP, incumbency in Town and strengthened Town, because back in March of 2012, they won the Town division by almost 1,000 votes. So for the JLP to have flipped it in February and only lose by 54 on Friday, it gives you a sense as to the political standing. And of course, the JLP turned back the contest from PNP candidates who were parading as independents in Northwest St. Andrew and Southern Trelawney. But I don't want us to shift focus too much. I want to come back to conference because there were 5 principal things the Prime Minister tackled at conference, Richard. And I will allow you to pose a question. I will get into it, but I just want to enumerate them for the listeners before I come to.
No, we're gonna get to them. But I wanted to pick up on the point of messaging, because when I started watching on television, I was noticing that there were a number of females who were actually speaking, and they were not repeating each other in any way whatsoever. And it seems to me, as an onlooker, that there was a deliberate effort to ensure that the female voice or voices were heard. Is that correct?
Richie, you are absolutely correct. You are spot on in your observation, because the women of Jamaica are the backbone of our society. They are the mothers in our households, the people who are the finance ministers in each household across Jamaica. They are the ones who have to turn $1,000 into $10,000. And so for the Jamaica Labour Party, we give pride of place to our women, we value our women, and we don't see them as mere tokens. We don't see them as props in a production. They are front and center of what we do and are critical to our formulation of policy. So when you think of craft vendors, for example, most of the craft vendors across Jamaica, whether they're in the Montego Bay craft market or the Ocho Rios craft market, they are women who oftentimes and in many instances head their households, and that's why I'm happy for the announcement the Prime Minister made in relation to craft vendors. He's going to waive certain fees that were owed, and of course, for the December and January period coming up, they will get a relief in terms of fees as craft vendors, just to give them a stimulus, basically. We recognize that people are having it, challenging, and the government is responding and demonstrating that it cares. Some people talk about caring and loving the poor, and those who are having a hard time getting by, the JLP is actually the set of people who do it and demonstrate their care.
It is believed that what has been happening in the tourism sector recently might be causing some anxious moments for the government. And the question is, if you can elaborate a little bit more on the goodies of being offered to the tourism workers, and whether or not you believe that this will cause now some sort of a reprieve or settlement within in the tourism sector.
Well, I'm happy you posed that question, because as we've seen, there is considerable disquiet in the tourism sector as we speak, and for good reason. Our Jamaican people are no-nonsense people who are assertive, and so to the extent that there are practices at respective hotel plants where people, workers that is, are not being treated fairly, just in terms of just basic respect to be accorded and afforded to them, and fair compensation. The government recognizes that these things are untenable, and therefore it is good that workers are holding their management to account. They are speaking up, and they are essentially forcing management to hit the reset button. From the government side, what the Prime Minister announced yesterday is that the government will be abolishing taxes on the tips or the gratuity payment that are associated with hotel operations. That will help to put money back in the pockets of tourist workers. And I'm sure they're happy this morning, and they're going to be better off going forward as a result of it. And as I said before, just sheer issues of fair compensation and better treatment are things that are receiving focused attention by the government. The tourism minister and his team would have met with all the players in the sector last Monday. And the idea is that there's going to be a pulling of the stakeholders in a more formidable way going forward to ensure that certain basic conditions of service and treatment exist across the sector in terms of the respective properties.
Now, let's focus a little bit more on some other goodies that were announced as it relates to the National Water Commission customers and also JPSCO customers. Elaborate on those for me.
Yeah, so Richard, economic management and what we often refer to as macroeconomic stability, these things are not ends in themselves. So when the government speaks about managing the affairs of the country, that may not necessarily mean anything to the small man in Jamaica and the ordinary household. And so what we are demonstrating as a government is that there are certain dividends, there are certain returns that are associated with managing the country well. Because when government grows tax revenue and manages the economy well, and the economy is performing better than it had ever performed under Omar Davies and PJ Patterson, for example, what it means is that it frees up more money for government to do more for the men and women of Jamaica. And I'll just share a few of them with you. Because first of all, the Prime Minister touched on the matter of water poverty. A number of people, for example, Richie, have had their water supply disconnected for quite some time, and they have racked up considerable arrears in that regard. And so what the Prime Minister has announced is that for persons who have been disconnected from the NWC supply for debts that are in excess of 2 years, pensioners that is, and people who meet path-related requirements or standards, those people will get a write-off of the NWC debt that they owe. There will be a waiver of the reconnection fee in relation to restoring your NWC water connection. And that will also have a certain stimulating effect in the economy because, as you can appreciate, a number of persons who would wish to transfer property, they are not able so to do because that would have been tied up due to a debt overhang to the NWC. And so when you remove and relieve them of this debt, it basically unlocks this particular tie-up, and it frees up developments in the movement of property, and I dare say perhaps in the construction sector, because a man who newly acquires a property may retrofit it, he may put on a new roof and so on. And just to enumerate a couple more, the Prime Minister announced measures that will assist with energy poverty in terms of bringing more relief to consumers, not least being the movement of GCT from 15% on electricity to 7%, not even half, This is more than a 50% cut in the electricity, the GCT on electricity. And of course, there were goodies in relation to the public transportation sector. And as I said before, there were goodies in relation to small business operations because our craft vendors are key small business operators. And of course, there are goodies in relation to education as well.
Mm-hmm. So what do you say to persons out there who are somewhat critical of these being delivered at this time and are calling it tactics towards electioneering? What would you say to that individual?
We recognize that in Jamaica, we have often practiced the politics that essentially exploit the Jamaican people, almost insult their intelligence, and cause people to be distrustful or cynical of the body politic and the political process. And what we're saying to the people is that is certainly not what the JLP stands for and represents. Certainly not in this dispensation. Even if we had those transgressions in the past, where we were in the business of political one-upmanship or anything that is untoward, in this enlightened JLP, in this new dispensation, we are doing things differently. We are delivering for the Jamaican people. And so what we spent a number of years doing, Richie, was to concretize and consolidate our macroeconomic stability. As I said earlier in this conversation, macroeconomic management, how you shepherd the affairs of the country, those things are not an end in themselves. You have to move beyond that because it makes no sense for you to be growing the grass while the horse starves. And the point we're making here is that Jamaica has performed so admirably that government is increasingly in a good position to give back. And that is not just today. That is a phenomenon right throughout this particular government's tenure. Because from the very get-go, we gave the tax break. We moved initially to 1 million, then we moved subsequent to that in 2017 to 1.5 million. So we delivered on our 2016 election undertaking as it relates to 1.5. We have had 8 consecutive years, Richard, of no new taxes. That means something. Omar Davies does not know what it is like to present a budget with no new taxes. Him simply don't know it. Yeah? And the truth of the matter is that it is not just the announcements that were made by the Prime Minister yesterday morning that exhibit and demonstrate the government's tenacity and propensity to exhibit care for the Jamaican people. We have been doing it right through this administration. We reduced GCT, my friend, from 16.5% to 15%. Yeah, we provided a reverse income tax credit where persons who earn less than $3 million per annum, those persons receive $20,000, and it is just under 300,000 Jamaicans who have signed up and have met the criteria to receive that $20,000 so far, and some persons have, because we'll be making out the disbursements in batches, and some people have already received their $20,000 in that regard. So to come with measures as it relates to energy poverty, water poverty, education poverty, and of course transportation poverty, because them young youth there who live out in rural Jamaica, who don't know what it is like to enjoy subsidized public transportation, they are now being brought front and center, not by PJ Patterson, not by Portia Simpson Miller, not by Peter David Phillips, not by Mark Golding, but by Andrew Michael Holness, my friend. It is the JLP that is once and for all addressing this issue and resolving this inequity in terms of rural transportation. Others have talked the talk. We are not just talking the talk, we are walking the walk, and that's what I'm happy about coming out of conference last afternoon.
You have you as a party tabulated the cost it will take to provide this level of care, and do you think, for instance, that the amnesty at the NWC will impact revenue negatively and cause issues in terms of their operations?
That's an excellent question, Rich, and I'll tell you why it's an excellent question. Any measure that gives back to people or seeds tax revenue is a measure that essentially makes less money available. When you pull money from somewhere, you have to make it up back elsewhere. And what I'm saying to your listeners this morning is that the JLP government, we are the government of no new taxes. We are the government of what is called revenue neutral measures. So in other words, when we give a break here, we give the break here because we have already calculated and identified where it will be coming from in order to do this. So in other words, in order to afford my wife a new pair of earrings, me done set aside the $60,000 what me did make from some overtime that I did or an assignment I worked on. For example, I wrote a speech for somebody and the person paid me $100,000. May I take $60,000 out of it, buy a pair of earrings for my wife, and $20,000 of it, for example, to buy her a set of Bridget sandals for her birthday. That is the similar way in which this government operates. So let me be very clear. In relation to the energy poverty alleviation measures that were announced, the indication I've received is that that will cost just about 1.5 billion Jamaican dollars because government is giving up tax revenue. You're moving from 15% on the GCT to 7%. That will be giving up just to, about $1.5 billion. The other measures do come at a cost as well, but based on the government's fiscal program, which we will all hear more about in the 2025-2026 budget, we will hear how government intends to finance these initiatives, but importantly, we are the government of no new taxes. We are the government of fiscal responsibility. So anything we do is already costed, it is already pre-planned, and it will make sense. Andrew Holness is a man who has his hands on the wheel. He's a sober leader, and he has a team of persons who are committed to fiscal responsibility.
And in closing, are you expecting a bump in popularity of the JLP as a result of these announced measures?
Well, we have done our messaging. We have not just been messaging, but as the party-forming government, we are supportive of a government that has been putting runs on the board and actually doing things. I said to you a while ago that some people, because of the practice of Jamaican politics and just political culture globally, have been in the business of majoring in the talk. We don't necessarily major just in the talk. We actually major in walking the walk and doing things for people. And so in terms of political calculus, we are hoping as a political party to continue to impress upon the Jamaican people and engage them in such a way that their sympathies and their appreciation for what is actually being done in serving them and delivering for them gets to such levels that they are prepared to entrust the JLP with a third term of office, and we would have brought the Jamaican we would have brought ourselves into the confidence of the Jamaican people in that regard. So in terms of the political benefit and, the political dividends, we are very much hopeful for that, because any political party, any corporate entity that is appealing to people in the marketplace, that's precisely what you're seeking to achieve. And we are doing it not just out of mealy mouth talk, but out of demonstrable and tangible action.
All right. So the 70-odd million that was spent on conference, you think it was money well spent?
Oh, no, man. Money well spent. Subtle. You could not have gotten more value for money. The labor rights are upbeat. The people had a good time. It was a nice, clean, focused and sober event. We didn't have any gimmicks. We didn't have any theatrics. We didn't have any, empty promises. What we saw yesterday was essentially facts. We communicated our achievements. We were sound on the messaging, and we were asking and imploring the Jamaican people to entrust the JLP basically with a third term of office to continue serving them and delivering for them in ways that no other political party in Jamaica can. Other people will put on a comedy show and will put on theatrics and will put on a circus. In the JLP, we don't turn our conference into a circus. We have focused messaging and focused production when we go to conference.
I'm sure that Damien Crawford of the People's National Party, who will be my guest this morning at 8:05, will have a lot more to say about that. But thank you, Marlon. It was good.
Indeed, as he should.
Yes. It was good
all
talking.
All the best, my brother.
Yeah, man, take care. Have a good day.
And all the best to your listeners.
All right. All right. That's Marlon Morgan from the Communications Task Force of the Jamaica Labour Party.